The gravy hadn't even touched the meat loaf when she said it. One sentence. 10 words. Sharp enough to slice through the laughter at the table like piano wire. If I told the truth, this marriage would dissolve tonight. No one moved. Not her father, still mid-sip of his Pinot. Not her sister, whose mouth hung slightly open above a half-spoon of green beans. Not me. Especially not me. I sat there, motionless, hearing the faint hum of the dishwasher from the kitchen, the soft clinking of cutlery being slowly set down around me. The air changed. You know that weird pressure drop before a thunderstorm? Like that, only inside my ribcage. She didn't look at me when she said it. She stared down at her plate like she was still deciding whether to eat the roll she'd buttered. Her voice didn't shake. It wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. I didn't ask what she meant. I didn't need to. Because when someone plants a live grenade in the middle of your dining room and calmly reaches for the salt, you don't ask where they bought it. You run. So I stood up. I didn't slam my chair. I didn't yell. I didn't even look at her. I walked past the family we'd spent years trying to impress. Past the gallery of staged wedding photos on the hallway wall. Past the flickering birthday candles on the half-melted cake her mom brought over from Kroger. Out the front door. Into the cold. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. My feet moved. My brain didn't. Behind me, the house kept glowing like nothing happened. From the sidewalk, it looked like a postcard. Happy. Warm. Safe. Inside, she was probably still eating. I walked until my legs ached. I think it was 3, maybe 4 miles. I ended up on a bench outside a shuttered pharmacy, hands in my pockets, throat burning from the wind. That was the night everything broke. Not because of what she said, but because I knew she meant it. Because she'd waited until we were surrounded by family to say it. Because she wanted witnesses. Not to her guilt, but to my silence. And the worst part? That wasn't even the secret. The real one was waiting in our bedroom, folded neatly inside a purple folder she forgot to hide. The street was dead quiet when I finally returned, just after midnight. I had no plan, no speech prepared. I didn't even know why I came back. Maybe I wanted answers. Maybe I wanted her to look me in the eye. Or maybe, I hate to admit it, I just didn't know where else to go. The porch light was still on. Our living room window glowed like always, curtains drawn halfway as if to suggest a home both open and private. I walked up to the door slowly, expecting shouting, or crying, or at least a lock turned against me. But the door opened with the same soft click it always had. Inside, the silence was more jarring than any confrontation could have been. Everyone was gone. The dishes were washed. The table cleared. The wine glasses dried and placed upside down beside the sink. It was like the evening had been wiped clean, erased. As if her sentence had only existed in my head. I walked down the hallway. Every light had been turned off except for the one in our bedroom. She wasn't there. But the folder was. It sat on the edge of the bed, closed, violet, unassuming. Like a school binder left behind by mistake. I don't know why I touched it. I wasn't planning to. But there was something about the way it was positioned, too neat, too deliberate, that made it feel like bait. Inside were printouts. Dozens of them. Some screenshots of text conversations. Others were images, low resolution, blurry, some clearly zoomed in from surveillance cams or parking lot security feeds. The first few pages were boring. Generic messages. Basic plans to meet up. Then, things got worse. A photo of her outside the Hilton Garden Inn on 9th. Another of her walking out 3 hours later with someone. At first, I thought it was an old friend, maybe a coworker, until I flipped to the next page and my hands went ice cold. It was a man I hadn't seen in over a decade. A man who used to be my best friend. Lyle Emmett. We played in the same college band. We drank cheap whiskey in dorm stairwells. He was at our wedding. He toasted us. Hugged my mother. He moved to Colorado 8 years ago and dropped off the map. I hadn't heard from him since. Now, there he was, leaning casually against her car, kissing her. And the timestamp? 2 weeks before the dinner. I dropped the folder. My vision blurred. Not from tears, at least not then, but from something far deeper. Something like nausea in my chest. It wasn't just betrayal. It was calculation. She'd planned this. She invited our families. She made that comment at dinner. All of it felt like a slow, theatrical exit she'd written for herself, and I was just the character who didn't get the script. I sat on the bed, unsure if I was more humiliated or numb. My own wife. With my oldest friend. Laughing behind my back, taking their little affair on weekend trips while I folded laundry and reheated leftovers she didn't have time to eat. That night I slept in the guest room, I didn't close my eyes. I didn't turn off the lamp. I laid there with the folder open beside me, rereading the messages until the sun bled into the blinds. The next morning, I woke up, or maybe just stood up from not sleeping, and she was already gone. But she'd left something behind. A handwritten note on the kitchen counter. It had just 2 lines. If you want to talk, I'll be staying at the cabin. Alone. Lyle's not with me. And under it? A key I hadn't seen in years. The cabin. The one we stopped visiting after the first few years of marriage. The one we bought together on a whim when we were still pretending we liked the same things. That place had been locked up and forgotten, just like so much else between us. I stared at the note for a long time. Because if she wanted to talk, why did it feel like a trap? The key felt heavier than it should have. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe just memories weighing it down. I hadn't held that brass thing in years. It still had the same chipped green plastic tag we wrote, Lake, on with a fading sharpen. And now, somehow, it was back in my hand, like a test. I didn't pack anything. Just threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and left. The drive to the cabin was about 2.5 hours, cutting through the flatlands and into the hills, the kind of drive where you forget what day it is and only realize you've been clenching the steering wheel when your knuckles ache. I rehearsed what I'd say to her, again and again, but everything sounded pathetic. How could you? Why him? What does he have that I don't? All of it made me feel small, like a teenager writing angry lyrics in a spiral notebook. So instead, I drove in silence and let the static hum of the road do the thinking. The cabin was exactly as I remembered, and exactly how I didn't want it to be. Still, quiet. Almost too clean. A fresh layer of firewood stacked by the door, and someone had recently swept the porch. Her car was there, parked beneath the old pine tree, coated in pollen. I stood at the front steps for what felt like 10 minutes, key in hand, staring at the door like it might breathe. No sounds inside. No movement behind the curtains. Just a light on in the back room, probably the bedroom. Part of me hoped she wouldn't be there. Another part hoped she'd answer the door in tears, full of apologies and explanations that would somehow make it all make sense. But she didn't answer at all. I unlocked the door slowly. No click. Just the soft slide of a bolt. Inside, it smelled like cedar and dust and something floral, her perfume, faint but familiar. The living room looked untouched since our last visit years ago. That scratch on the floor from when I dropped the coffee table? Still there. The ugly blue throw pillows she insisted on keeping? Still fluffed on the couch like someone actually cared about them. She wasn't in the bedroom. She wasn't in the kitchen. Her bag was there, on the dining table. Her phone, too, locked, of course. But she was nowhere. Then I saw it. A single glass of wine on the back porch table. Half full. Sweating in the spring air. The sliding door was open. And as I stepped out, my breath caught. She was down by the lake. Sitting at the edge of the dock with her feet in the water, motionless, like a painting. She wore a gray sweatshirt, mine, and her hair was tied back in that loose, lazy way she did when she wasn't trying to impress anyone. I didn't call out. I just walked toward her slowly, the boards creaking under my feet until she finally turned. And then she said something that made my stomach twist. You took longer than I thought. I was beginning to think you'd bring him with you. I stopped. Everything in me went still. What? I said. She didn't repeat it. She just stared at the lake. And then, like it was nothing, she added, Lyle's not who you think he is. I sat down a few feet away. I didn't want to be near her, but I couldn't walk away again. Not without knowing what kind of twisted game she was playing. What does that even mean? I asked, my voice thinner than I wanted. She looked at me, finally. Her eyes were red. She hadn't been crying, no, they were red like she hadn't slept in days. Like she'd been watching her life fall apart and didn't know how to blink it away. You think this was just cheating, she said. But it's not. It never was. I didn't love him. I didn't even like him. I was trying to end something that started long before we met. I needed someone who could help me, remove a piece of my past. I stared at her, completely lost. And for the first time, I realized I had no idea who this woman really was. Corinne had always seemed so composed, so sharp, so pulled together. But now, sitting beside her in the silver light, I saw something else entirely. Something broken. Something hiding. And then, before I could ask another question, she whispered the last thing I expected to hear. He said he was your brother. The dock suddenly felt unstable beneath me. My brother? I don't have a brother. At least, I didn't think I did. My first reaction was to laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Ridiculous. Like she'd pulled the phrase from a soap opera and tried to drop it into our reality. He said he was your brother. What was I supposed to do with that? Apologize for not knowing I had one? Offer to split birthday cards? I stared at Corinne, waiting for her to blink, to flinch, to give away that she was bluffing. She didn't. Instead, she stood up slowly, wiped her damp feet with the hem of her sweatshirt, and walked past me back toward the cabin. I followed, not because I believed her, but because I couldn't let her drop a bomb like that and slink off into silence. Inside, she moved like a sleepwalker. She didn't turn on any lights, just went straight to the coat closet near the kitchen, reached into the crawl space above the doorframe, and pulled down a dusty shoebox wrapped in twine. She placed it on the dining table and slid it toward me without a word. I opened it slowly. The air inside smelled like mildew and paper. Letters. Dozens of them. Old. Some yellowed with time, others stained like they'd been caught in a storm. The handwriting varied, some loopy and emotional, others scrawled in rushed block print. But one name kept appearing over and over. Dorian. And another? A woman named Naomi. I flipped through the first few. Most were dated from the late 90s. The tone was strange, intimate, almost desperate. Some were addressed to Naomi from someone begging her to never speak of Dorian again. Others were from Dorian himself, ranting about being cut off, hidden, and shut out by the slates. My last name. One of the envelopes had a return address from a juvenile facility 2 towns over. Another from a halfway house. The more I read, the more a sickening feeling curled into my gut. Dorian Slate. Half-brother? Disowned? But why hadn't anyone ever told me? Corinne sat across the table, watching me with a look that was half apology, half dread. I didn't know when we got together, she said. He never used your last name. He just went by Dory when we met. It wasn't until I saw an old envelope in his apartment that I made the connection. I thought he was just a drifter, someone I dated out of boredom, out of rebellion. But then he said something about your mom, about her locking him in a room once when he was 6. I didn't believe him until I saw one of those letters in his drawer. I was dizzy. My mom? Locking up a child? It couldn't be true. My mother had always been kind, protective, gentle in the way only Midwestern mothers can be. She made me soup when I had a fever and folded my shirts with hospital corners. She never raised her voice. She volunteered at church. She brought casseroles to funerals. But I also remember the attic, the one room we weren't allowed in. Ever. I always thought it was just where she stored Christmas decorations. Corinne leaned forward. Her voice was hoarse now. I think your family erased him. I think they paid people to move him through the system. I think he came back looking for something, maybe revenge, maybe just acknowledgement. But when he saw I was married to you. She stopped. I filled in the rest. He saw me, someone who got the life he never had. The brother who had a house, a wife, a warm seat at every dinner table. And he took the one thing he thought would even the score. Corinne. My wife. Except maybe she wasn't really mine anymore. Maybe she never was. I didn't speak. I stood up, heart pounding, and walked outside into the night. The air was cold and sharp. Somewhere nearby, an owl screeched. I gripped the railing of the porch until my knuckles turned white. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was a missing piece of my life. A shadow that had followed me without ever being seen. And now that it had caught up, it had taken everything. Behind me, Corinne stood in the doorway, arms folded across her chest. You don't believe me, she said. I believe you, I whispered. I just don't think you've told me everything. She hesitated. Then, after a long silence, she finally said it. I didn't come here to confess. I came here to tell you he's missing. And I think it's my fault. I didn't answer right away. What do you say to something like that? He's missing. And I think it's my fault. Those words didn't just hang in the air. They rooted there, thick and unmovable, like a cold fog crawling through the doorway. Corinne didn't cry. She wasn't the kind of person who broke down easily. But something in her posture collapsed then, like she'd been carrying the weight of a secret for too long and finally set it down on my chest. She walked past me and sat slowly on the porch steps. I followed, but not too close. She stared out at the lake, her voice flat. 3 weeks ago, he showed up at my office unannounced. He looked different, older, thinner, like he hadn't been sleeping. I tried to act normal, pretended I wasn't surprised. He told me he was leaving town, going somewhere far, but that he needed to talk to me first. He said he'd found out something about your family, Vernon. Something big. Something worth disappearing for. I was shaking, but I kept still. She went on. He told me to meet him at the old bus station by the edge of town, the one that shut down in the early 2000s. Said he didn't trust phones anymore. He sounded paranoid, like he thought someone was following him. I didn't know what to do, so I didn't go. She paused then, looked down at her hands, her voice quieter now. He said if anything happened to him, someone needed to tell you that you deserve the truth. But I didn't think he was serious. I thought it was just another one of his games. I sat on the edge of the steps, my head in my hands, trying to piece together what was real and what wasn't. This whole thing was unraveling faster than I could keep up with. My family, my marriage, my identity. And now, my supposed brother, who I'd never even met, was gone. Corinne stood up again and disappeared into the cabin. She came back out a moment later holding something I hadn't expected, an old Polaroid photo, creased at the edges, the kind you had to shake to develop back in the day. She handed it to me carefully, like it might dissolve in the wind. It was a picture of a child, maybe 8 or 9, standing on a swing set behind a chain-link fence. A boy, skinny, buzzed hair. And standing next to him was a younger version of my mother. Except she wasn't smiling. She looked tired, guarded. Her arm was wrapped around the boy's shoulders, but there was no affection in it. More like she was making sure he didn't run. On the back, in faded pen, it read, Dorian, 1996. With Naomi. Last visit. My hand trembled as I turned it over again. That couldn't be real. I'd never seen this photo in my life. My mom never once mentioned another child. She always said she had trouble conceiving, that I was her miracle, her only one. And yet here was proof, dated and signed in her own handwriting. I stood up without saying a word and went inside. The floor creaked beneath me like it always had. I moved to the kitchen, opened the drawer where we kept the old charger cords and batteries, and pulled out my phone. It had 24 missed calls, 5 of them from my sister, the rest from my mother. I scrolled through the texts. One from my sister caught my eye. It read, "Why aren't you answering? Mom's freaking out. She says you opened the box." The box. I froze. I knew the one she meant. The small chest in my parents' basement with the broken clasp. The one they always kept under a pile of blankets, padlocked for sentimental reasons. I'd asked about it once when I was 12. My dad got quiet. My mom told me it was just old documents from my dad's military days. Now I wasn't so sure. I locked the phone and set it down. My mouth was dry, my pulse pounding in my ears. Corinne stood in the hallway, watching me. "I didn't come to the cabin to hurt you, Vernon," she said quietly. "I came because I'm scared. Because I think something's going to happen. Or maybe already has. And because I think they're trying to make him disappear. For good this time." That's when I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. I was 6 years old. I'd woken up in the middle of the night and wandered into the hallway. The attic door was slightly open. Inside, I'd heard whispering. I don't remember what was said, only that it wasn't my parents talking. And then a soft voice saying, "Please let me out. I'll be good. I promise." I thought I dreamed it. Until now. I drove to my parents' house the next morning without telling Corinne. I didn't leave a note. I didn't answer her when she asked where I was going. I just got in the car and drove like my mind was being dragged behind the wheel. There's something primal about needing to see the face of the person who lied to you the longest, not to scream, not to hit, but to look them in the eye and ask, "Why did you do it?" The neighborhood hadn't changed. Same cracked sidewalks, same cul-de-sac full of trimmed hedges and flags hung year-round. The house stood there with its white siding and green shutters like nothing had ever gone wrong inside. I parked on the street, not the driveway. That detail mattered, somehow. I didn't knock. I still had a key. I hadn't used it in years, but muscle memory kicked in, and suddenly I was standing in the foyer of my childhood, inhaling the same faint lavender scent my mother insisted on spraying into the air vents. A clock ticked steadily from the hallway wall. The hum of the refrigerator buzzed from the kitchen, and then her voice came from the living room like she'd been waiting for me. "I figured you'd come," she said. I turned the corner and found her sitting on the floral-patterned couch, hands folded in her lap, eyes calm. Not surprised, not angry, just composed. My father was nowhere to be seen. She gestured to the armchair like it was a formal meeting. I didn't sit. "I opened the box," I said. She didn't flinch. "I know." I held up the photograph. "Why didn't you tell me I had a brother?" Now her face changed. Not much, just a twitch in the cheek, a tightening at the jaw. She looked down at her hands, like they might give her strength. "Because you didn't." "Not really." "What does that mean?" "He wasn't mine," she said. "He was your father's. From before. Before I knew about it. Before he told me. His mother was unstable. Dangerous. He begged me to help. Said the boy needed structure. A roof. Someone to raise him right. And I tried, Vernon. I did. She stood now, her voice gaining momentum, as if she'd rehearsed this speech in her head for years but never had the nerve to say it. But he was angry, violent. You were just a baby, and he would stand over your crib at night, silent. He once tried to take the kitchen scissors and cut his own hair off. Said it was full of bugs. He carved into the wall with a fork. He told me God whispered to him from the attic vent. I stared at her, unsure if she was trying to justify what she'd done or convince herself it had been necessary. So you locked him in the attic, I said, barely above a whisper. She looked me in the eye now. For one night. One night, Vernon. Because he scared you. You cried when he touched your toys. You wouldn't sleep. I was pregnant again. I was scared too. But the next morning, he was gone. Left through the roof somehow. We never found him. She stepped closer, her voice cracking. Your father made calls. Arranged things. Said it was better that way. Said no one would take him seriously if we said he ran off. So we stayed quiet. We said nothing. It was cleaner. I felt like I was going to throw up. Cleaner? You erased him. He wasn't stable, she snapped. He wasn't safe. And you were my son. You were the one I chose to protect. My voice trembled. Did he ever try to come back? She hesitated, then nodded. Once. About 10 years ago. He showed up outside church. He looked awful. Skin and bones. Eyes like glass. I told him if he ever came near you, I'd call the police. That I had enough evidence to make sure he was never free again. I stepped back, reeling. So that's why he changed his name. That's why he found Corinne. That's why I couldn't finish. You have to understand, she said, reaching for me. You don't know what he was capable of. I pulled away. And you don't know what he became. I walked past her, heading for the basement. She called after me, but I didn't stop. I needed to see the box again. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The basement was dark and musty, the air thick with dust and time. I found the old chest under a tarp, shoved behind a water heater. I dragged it out, ripped the padlock off with a rusty tool I found in a bucket, and opened it. Inside were files, medical records, police reports, drawings, dozens of them, childlike sketches of eyes, hands, dark staircases. One with a stick figure crouched under a bed, another of a figure hanging upside down in the attic, mouth sewn shut. I felt sick. Then I found a cassette tape, labeled in scrawled ink, Dorian, 1995, recording number 4. I held it in my hand, unsure if I wanted to know what was on it. Behind me, my mother stood in the stairwell, her voice calm again. He used to record himself. Said he needed proof that he existed. That someday someone would want to hear it. I turned to face her, holding the tape. Well, I said, he was right. I didn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my childhood bedroom. The same room with faded wallpaper, the same bed frame my father assembled with too many screws, and stared at the cassette in my hand for hours. I couldn't play it there. I didn't want my mother hearing what was on it, or worse, pretending she didn't care. So I waited until the sky turned pale gray, then drove back to the cabin without a word, clutching the tape like it might answer every question I'd ever had about myself. Corinne was waiting on the porch when I arrived, wrapped in a blanket, coffee in her lap, face pale and unreadable. She didn't say anything as I walked past her and into the living room. I pulled out the old boombox we used to keep in the storage closet for parties, the kind with scratched speakers and a tape deck that clicked too loud when it engaged. I dusted it off, popped in the tape, and hit play. Static. A long pause. Then a child's voice, thin, hesitant, barely above a whisper. My name is Dorian Slate. I'm 9. I'm hiding in the attic. If someone finds this, please don't tell them. I'm not trying to scare Vernon. I just want to see him. I think I'm his brother. I think I used to live here. But she says I'm not. She says I made it up. I leaned forward. My breath caught. She says if I talk about it again, I won't be allowed back downstairs. I don't think that's fair. I saw the baby photos. I saw his name. I heard Dad say my boys once when he thought no one was listening. The tape crackled. Silence again. Sometimes, I hear Vernon cry at night. I think he knows I'm here. Or maybe he dreams me. I don't know. I think dreams are how we remember things other people want us to forget. Corinne stepped in behind me, slowly, arms crossed tightly over her chest. He used to draw, I said quietly. Hundreds of them. They're in the box. Hallways, locked doors, hands reaching through cracks. She nodded, eyes fixed on the boombox. The next part of the tape was different. Dorian's voice was older now, recorded later, maybe as a teenager. It sounded harder, bitter. If you're listening to this, Vernon, it means you finally opened the box. Good. I always thought you were the kind who needed proof, not feelings. I used to watch you from the bus stop. You were always wearing that dumb red backpack. I wanted to tell you everything, but I didn't want to ruin your life. Not like they ruined mine. A long breath. She used to lock the attic door and play the piano so she wouldn't hear me yell. That's the part one hated the most. Not the being locked up. The music. It meant I didn't exist. I paused the tape. Corinne sat down on the edge of the couch, staring at the floor. He's dead, isn't he? I asked. She didn't look at me. Her voice was tight. I don't know. After I didn't meet him that day, I got a voicemail. One I never told you about. It was only 6 seconds long. He just said, "You were my last bet." And then he hung up. I haven't heard anything since. Where did he live? Edge of town. Warehouse loft. He kept to himself. His landlord said he paid in cash. No records. No ID. Then we're going there, I said, standing. We arrived at the warehouse by noon. It was tucked behind a lumber yard, surrounded by weeds and broken concrete. The building looked abandoned. No windows. Just a single dented metal door. But the key Corinne had still worked. Inside, it was like stepping into a crypt. Cold. Quiet. Barely lit. The floor was covered in notebooks, hundreds of them, stacked, scattered, open mid-sentence. Walls were covered in chalk writing, phrases repeated again and again. They buried me alive. They buried me alive. Find Vernon. Tell him who he is. Blood is louder than silence. There was a mattress on the floor. No sheets. Just a blanket with holes and a single photo pinned to the wall above it. It was me. A school photo from 8th grade. I stepped backward, heart racing. Corinne looked around, her voice shaky. I had no idea it was this bad. I thought he was just broken. I didn't know he'd been holding on to all of this. I moved slowly through the room, picking up notebooks, flipping pages. Most of it was madness. Scribbles. Symbols. But one entry was clean. Precise. As if he'd written it on a rare day of clarity. It read, "If you ever come here, Vernon, I want you to know something. I don't blame you. I never did. You were the light I stared at through the cracks in the floor. You were the only reason I stayed quiet. I wanted you to have the life I didn't. And I'm glad you did. I just wanted to hear you say my name once." Tears blurred the page. I hadn't cried in years, but something inside me broke wide open right then. "I'm saying it now," I whispered. "Dorian, I'm saying it now." Corinne touched my shoulder. That's when we heard it. From somewhere in the back of the warehouse, a faint creaking sound, like a hinge giving way, followed by a soft thud. We weren't alone. The creaking came again. Closer this time. Corinne froze, her fingers tightening around my wrist. We stood completely still, listening. A soft rustling behind a stack of rusted file cabinets in the far corner of the loft. My breath caught. Every instinct told me to run, but I couldn't. Not now. Not after everything we'd read, seen, learned. If Dorian was still here, if somehow this wasn't over. I stepped slowly toward the sound. Corinne followed at a distance. As I turned the corner past the cabinets, the source of the noise revealed itself. A raccoon. It bolted as soon as it saw me, knocking over an old broom and a coffee can. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. My knees gave way a little, half from relief, half from the adrenaline finally crashing. Corinne laughed softly, almost disbelievingly, and I laughed too, a short, broken sound, but real. After everything, after the heaviness and ghosts and silence, there was something oddly comforting about a dumb raccoon making noise in the dark. We spent another hour going through the loft. We didn't find Dorian. No signs of him physically. No body. No blood. Nothing definitive. But I found something better than answers. I found proof of him. Proof he existed. Proof he loved. Proof he remembered me. In a drawer by the mattress, folded between 2 paperbacks, I found the final thing he ever wrote. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't a message to hurt anyone. It was a page from a notebook, carefully written in blue pen. "Forgiveness is the final freedom. They buried me, but I bloomed underground. Tell him I forgive them all. Tell him I never wanted revenge. I just wanted to be real." That was it. No signature. But it was his handwriting. We left the loft in silence, the sun beginning to set over the parking lot. The warehouse cast long shadows, but I didn't feel afraid of them anymore. I stood beside the car, holding Corinne's hand loosely in mine. We'd been through something neither of us could fully explain to anyone else. And oddly, that bound us tighter than I expected. I wasn't ready to call it love again, but I wasn't ready to let go, either. Back at the cabin, I lit a fire in the pit outside. We sat under a sky full of stars, wrapped in separate blankets, sipping tea, and listening to the woods breathe. I told her stories I hadn't told anyone, about the attic, about the dreams I used to have as a kid where someone was always just out of reach, calling my name. About the feeling that something had always been missing. And now, it wasn't. The next morning, I drove back to my parents' house. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I didn't demand anything. I just sat at the table with my mother and handed her the page from the notebook. She read it slowly. And for the first time in my life, I saw her cry. I never wanted him gone, she said, her voice trembling. I just didn't know how to be his mother. I nodded. That was enough. Maybe not perfect. Maybe not justice. But enough. Later that week, I had a bench installed at the edge of the lake by the cabin. I paid for a simple bronze plaque with one line engraved across the top. Dorian Slade, I hear you. I don't know where he is. Maybe he's gone. Maybe he's still out there, watching from the edge of another story. But wherever he is, I hope he knows that someone finally said his name. As for me, I've started over. Not loudly. Not dramatically. I didn't post about it. I didn't make any grand speeches. I just started going for walks in the morning. Reading again. Calling my sister more. Fixing the things I neglected in myself. Corinne and I are taking it slow. She apologized. I didn't forgive her right away, but I didn't walk away either. Some wounds take time. But now, at least, they're out in the open. She doesn't call him Lyle anymore. She calls him Dorian. That matters more than I thought it would. And sometimes, when I sit by the lake alone, I swear I hear a voice from somewhere beyond the trees. Not real. Not haunting. Just memory. Tell him I never wanted revenge. I just wanted to be real. You were real, Dorian. You still are. And so am I. The end.